Hello, everyone. My name is John, and it is wonderful, wonderful to have you here in my library today. Today, I am very excited to share with you a video I've been preparing for quite some time. I'll be talking about Julius Caesar by William Shakespeare, a play that I've read for years and years and years. It was one that was, I think we've all had at least one of Shakespeare's plays when we're in school, given to us to read. And Julius Caesar was the one that I was assigned. And at the time, I don't know that I appreciated it like I do now. But with historical context that I've received from reading different books and just years of rereads, I have come to really love this play, and I'm excited to share it with you. It's one of my favorites. I don't know that it's my all-time favorite, but it is one of my favorites of Shakespeare. And so I'm excited. I really am excited to get into this with you today. We're going to take a deeper dive look than I have in other videos, and I've prepared quite a bit. I hope that you forgive if I reference my notes here from time to time. I have extensive quotes to read off, and I hope that you stick around. If you are so inclined, please do subscribe and leave a comment. Those greatly encourage me as I'm getting started here on YouTube, but I appreciate your watching, and whatever you do, I appreciate you just being here and watching with me today. And that means very much to me to have people who listen to me ramble about books, because I think that they're important. Anyway, so let's get to Julius Caesar. Let's get in. This tragedy was written around 1599, and it deals primarily with the political turmoil in Rome and centering on the assassination of Julius Caesar by a group of Roman senators in 44 BC. It's one of Shakespeare's Roman plays. He wrote about 4. Coriolanus is one, Titus Andronicus is another, and he wrote a sequel to this play of sorts called Antony and Cleopatra, which deals with some of the aftermath of what this play deals with the war, the civil war between Mark Antony and Octavian, who would later become Caesar Augustus. Now, interestingly enough, and I learned this for the first time while I was preparing for this video, and I'm excited to share it with you. The date 1599 actually comes from the journal of a Swiss tourist named Thomas Plater, who stopped in at the Globe Theatre while in London. And I'll read you the full quote in a minute, but it's fascinating because we really don't get many times where we can peer so clearly into what it would be like to live in the same era as William Shakespeare and actually attend one of his plays. So this is one of the few examples that we have of what it was like to attend one of these plays at the time. He writes, and I quote, "On September 21st, after lunch, about 2 o'clock, I and my party crossed the water, and there, in the house with the thatched roof, witnessed an excellent performance of the tragedy of the first emperor, Julius Caesar, with a cast of some 15 people. And when the play was over, they danced very marvelously and gracefully together as in their wont, 2 dressed as men and 2 dressed as women. And thus, daily, at 2 in the afternoon, London sometimes has 3 plays running in different places, all competing with each other, and those which play best obtain the most spectators. The playhouses are so constructed that they play on a raised platform so that everyone has a good view. There are different galleries and places, however, where the seating is better and more comfortable, and therefore is more expensive. For whoever cares to stand below only pays 1 English penny. But if he wishes to sit, he enters by another door and pays another penny. While if he desires to sit in the most comfortable seats, which are cushioned, where he not only sees everything well, but also can be seen, then he pays yet another English penny at another door. And during the performance, food and drink are carried out around the audience, so that for what one cares to pay, one may also have refreshment. The actors are most expensively costumed, for it is the English usage for eminent lords or knights at their decree to bequeath and leave almost the best of their clothes to their serving men, which it is unseemly for the latter to wear, and so they offer them to sell for a small sum of money to the actors. End quote. How interesting. I just thought that was the most interesting thing when I came upon that last week, and so I was happy to be able to share that with you. Now, back to the play itself. Shakespeare, in writing this, adapted Julius Caesar from one of Plutarch's parallel lives, which is a series of biographies that compare notable figures from Greek and Roman history. Now, I actually have my copy of Plutarch's Lives right here. It's a very big book, and in it, as I said, he compares Romans and Greeks together. So he'll have a Greek biography and a Roman biography, and he'll compare them. And so he has a biography about Caesar that's towards the back of the book, and he compares him to Alexander the Great, and then has a section afterward that details a little bit of his thoughts, comparing and contrasting the two men. He wrote this in the early 2nd century A.D., and it is a history. However, it is essential to note that Plutarch's account, although is based in historical records, is often influenced with his own moral judgments. I'll put it in his own words. He says at the beginning of his discussion of Alexander the Great, he says, and I quote, "In case I do not tell of all the famous actions of these men, nor even speak exhaustively at all in each particular case, but in epitome for the most part, not to complain. For it is not histories that I am writing, but lives. And in the most illustrious deeds there is not always a manifestation of virtue or vice. Nay, a slight thing, like a phrase or a jest, often makes a greater revelation of character than a battle in which thousands fall, or their greatest ornaments, or sieges of cities. Accordingly, just as painters get the likeness in their portraits from the face and the expression of the eyes wherein the character shows itself, but make very little account of the other parts of the body, so I must be permitted to devote myself rather to the signs of the soul in men, and by means of these to portray the life of each, leaving to others the description of their great contests." Now, of course, he does get into the big things that Caesar does in his life, but he's more interested in discussing the strengths and weaknesses of these men. And so to kind of deal more so in their personal lives than many other historians tend to do. Now, Julius Caesar, I think it's important to get a little bit of historical context into this play. There's a lot that is referenced, talking back to previous Roman history that I think is lost if we're not familiar. I think a lot of Shakespeare's contemporaries would have been familiar, especially the more learned of them. In classical education, you saw a lot of learning from Greek and Roman sources. They were taught Latin and all sorts of things, and the life of Caesar would be something that would be very familiar to these people. But in today's culture and society, that's just not the case. And so it's important to just make sure we have a little bit of context before we delve right into this play. I will say as a bit of preface, the life of Caesar and the fall of the Roman Republic is deeply complicated. There are books and books and books written about these things, and it is not possible for me to be able to describe every little detail, or to even really impart just how big what was going on was in every little detail. And so we'll have to suffice with what I've prepared here, which just kind of gives you just a little bit of background information. But there are other videos out there on the internet and other books that can explain all of this far better than I can in this short amount of time. But I will continue. To start, you really have to go all the way back to the birth of the Roman Republic itself. The Roman Republic was born from the disposal of a despotic tyrant named Tarquin. The leading man responsible for removing Tarquin from power was a man named Brutus. Now, this Brutus was said to be the ancestor of our play's protagonist, Brutus. And in throwing off their king, the Roman people saw themselves as free citizens, set apart from the kingdoms around them that were continually ruled by kings. However, it is important to note that due to the class system of patricians, plebeians, and slaves, as well as the differences in gender at this period of time between men and women, that all was not truly equal in the Republic, and the law definitely favored the patrician class, the noble class, above all else. But still, most Romans detested and feared the idea of their brand new republic being dissolved and replaced once again by a king. And this is why, when they developed their system of government, that they had 2 consuls, the highest position in their government, to be elected at a time. This was so that one's ambitions would be checked by the other. Now, hundreds of years after Tarquin and Brutus, the Roman Republic, after several generations of civil war, power struggle, and corruption under the likes of Caius Marius and Sulla, had become weak. Around 60 BC, Julius Caesar, Pompey the Great, and an extremely wealthy man named Marcus Licinius Crassus formed a strong political alliance called a triumvirate to bypass the political obstacles and advance their positions in the government. And to many in the Senate, this attempt to consolidate power was frightening. Now, with the help of his 2 allies, Caesar became one of the 2 consuls in 59 BC, and while in office, he passed laws that benefited his allies and infuriated what was the conservative wing of the Senate led by Cato the Younger. While in power, he held immunity for the things he was doing, but Cato and his allies were preparing to prosecute him for his actions the minute his term was complete. However, before they were able to take action against him, he was fortunate to be able to take governorship in Gaul and took off with several legions to quell the rebellious tribes there. And he spent about 9 years brutally and unmercifully quelling these uprisings. And these victories made him enormously popular in Rome, and so, fearing his continued popularity, the Senate attempted to recall Caesar to Rome and force him to disband his legions. Caesar, however, with trained, battle-hardened legions, crossed the Rubicon River directly into Italy. Now, I've actually prepared a quote from Plutarch himself that describes kind of the political situation building up to this crossing of the Rubicon River. And it mentions Pompey a little bit in his position in this as well. Caesar, I quote, "Caesar had long ago resolved upon the overthrow of Pompey, as Pompey, for that matter, upon his. For Crassus, the fear of whom had hitherto kept them in peace, having now been killed in Parthia. If the one of them wished to make himself the greatest man in Rome, he had only to overthrow the other. And if he again wished to prevent his own fall, he had nothing for it but to be beforehand with him whom he feared. Pompey had not long been under any such apprehensions, having till lately despised Caesar, as thinking it no difficult matter to put down him who he had himself advanced. But Caesar had entertained this design from the beginning against his rivals, and had retired, like an expert wrestler, to prepare himself apart for this combat, making the Gallic Wars his exercise ground. He had once improved the strength of his soldiery, and had heightened his own glory by his great actions, so that he was looked on as one who might challenge comparison with Pompey. Nor did he let go any of those advantages which were now given to him both by Pompey himself and the times, and the ill government of Rome, where all who were candidates for offices publicly gave money and without any shame bribed the people, who, having received their pay, did not contend for their benefactors with their bare suffrages, but with bows and swords and slings. So that, after having many times stained the place of election with blood of men killed upon the spot, they left the city at last without a government at all, to be carried around like a ship without a pilot to steer her, while all who had any wisdom could only be thankful if a course of such wild and stormy disorder and madness might end no worse than in a monarchy. Now, of course, this is not the opinion of every person in Rome, but with all of the political turmoil that was going on, it does seem as if there were many who were just wanting it all to be over. This republic was creating such a power structure and battle for political maneuvering that many had died in civil war and on hit lists that many of these eminent men were putting out. And so they figured that if one person would take control and take power, that might put an end to it. Now, to proceed with what I was reading over here, he crosses the Rubicon. He does not disband his legions. He marches on Rome and finds it basically empty. The Roman Senate and the government had fled Rome in the wake of his coming, and basically had made it about to Greece, I believe, where they prepared to fight back. And Caesar basically walked into Rome unopposed. The people there were kind of worried about what he might do, but basically, since they offered him no resistance, he left them alone. He was very gracious to his political enemies. The senators that were there, he was very gracious to. And if I remember correctly, and please correct me if I'm wrong, he left Mark Antony in place to oversee Rome as he continued onward to Greece to fight Pompey and the rest of the Roman Senate, who had gathered enough men to make a good fight. Now, Caesar did win the battle, and Pompey made his escape to Alexandria, Egypt, where he was assassinated. And Cato, the younger, who I mentioned previously, also made it into Africa, and ended up committing suicide as Caesar approached. And it's about this time that Caesar gets involved in the politics in Alexandria and fathers a son by Cleopatra named Caesarion, which he never. I will say that he never calls his own, but that is what Cleopatra claimed, that the son that they had was his, and ends up back in Rome after this brutal civil war that basically wiped out his opposition party that had spread out throughout the Roman Empire. Brutus, again, of whom this story is most related, is said to have been pardoned completely by Caesar, who was well known for pardoning his political enemies, something that his successor Octavian learned the example from, and was far more ruthless than Caesar himself was. And so Brutus actually was pardoned as he sided with the Roman Senate. And so now everybody's back in Rome. Caesar is made dictator for life, and the fear is that he has taken. I mean, he already has. He's taken full power for himself. The dictator for life could do, or the dictator could do whatever he wanted to do, but generally had such a short-term limit that that it was used only in extreme, dire circumstances. But he has since made himself dictator for the rest of his life. And the talk is that he's going to be allowed to wear a crown outside of Rome. He is refusing, as in the beginning of the play, he is refusing to take a crown while he's in Rome. Mark Antony is said to try and crown him with laurels at the local festival, but he is said 3 times to have denied that. But in many ways, he had already taken control. He had already had the power, but he knew that, it seems as if he knew that the title of king would be one that he would be more popular if he publicly denounced and resented. And I think that that's where we see Brutus and Cassius when we open up the play. The play begins on what is called the festival of, let's see, Lupercalia. Kind of a seemingly kind of a fertility festival where the young men run through the streets of Rome, and the ladies hold out their hands and receive lashes in order to hopefully aid them in their pregnancy, or to aid them in becoming fertile, to have a pregnancy. And while everyone is celebrating, we see, as the play opens, Brutus and Cassius standing off to the side. And I have an excerpt that comes from Act 1. Excuse me, this is the wrong placement. It comes from Act 1, Scene 2. Act 1, Scene 2. Brutus has a deep personal love for Caesar. Caesar was the lover of his mother, and had pardoned him personally during the Civil War, and personally was a good friend of Brutus. But Brutus was worried about his political ambitions, and so this is where we see Cassius attempt to turn Brutus's opinion around. Cassius says, "It is very much lamented, Brutus, that you have no such mirrors as will turn your hidden worthiness into your eye, that you might see your shadow. I have heard where many of the best respect in Rome, except immortal Caesar, speaking of Brutus and groaning underneath this age's yoke, have wished that noble Brutus held eyes." And Brutus replies, "Into what dangers would you lead me, Cassius, that you would have me seek into myself for that which is not in me?" And Cassius responds and says, "Therefore, good Brutus, be prepared to hear. And since you know that you cannot see yourself, so by reflection I will be your glass, and I will modestly discover to yourself that of yourself which you yet know not of. And be not jealous of me, gentle Brutus. Were I a common laughter, or did use to stale with ordinary oaths my love to every new protester, if you knew that I do fawn on men and hug them hard, and after scandal them, or if you know that I profess among myself in banqueting to all the rout, then do hold me dangerous." There's a flourish and shout. "By what means of this shouting I do fear for the people that they choose Caesar to be their king." Cassius responds, "Aye, do you fear it? Then I would think you would not have it so." And Brutus says, "I would not, O Cassius, for yet I love him well. But wherefore do you hold me here so long that you would impart to me? If it would be aught to the general good, set honor in one eye and death in the other, and I would look upon both indifferently. For let the gods so speed me as I love the name of honor more than I fear death." As a note, that does appear to be true. Brutus has a deep personal love and affection for Caesar, and probably has more in common, some say more in common with Caesar than he did the rest of the group. And in fact, he had a deep personal animosity to Pompey the Great, but he sided with him in the Civil War anyway. And so it does appear that that he is truly thinking about the well-being of the Roman Republic. But of course, he does also have his own ambitions. For what is he to say? He being one man, or one man among a conspiracy, who murders another man for being too powerful. Who is he to have to say so of all of that anyway? And so he is a man with personal ambitions himself, and it's something that Cassius is going to continue to build upon. Brutus, as I said, Cassius says, "I know that virtue to be in you, Brutus, as well as I know your outward favor. Well, honor is the subject of my story. I cannot tell you what you and other men think of this life, but for my single self, if I had as lief not to be, as live to be, in awe of such a thing as I myself, I was born as free as Caesar, and so were you. We have both fed as well, and we can both endure the winter's cold as well as he. For once upon a raw and gusty day, the troubled Tiber chafing with her shores, Caesar said to me, 'Darest thou, Cassius, now leap in with me into this angry flood, and swim to the yonder point,' upon which, encountered as I was, I plunged in and bade him to follow, and so indeed he did. The torrent roared as we did buffet it with lusty sinews, throwing it aside and stemming it with hearts of controversy. But ere we could arrive at the other point that I proposed, Caesar cried, 'Help me, Cassius, or I sink.' And I, as Aeneas, our great ancestor, did from the flames of Troy upon his shoulder old Anchises bear, so from the waves of the Tiber did I the tired Caesar. And this man is now become a god, and Cassius a wretched creature that must bend his body if Caesar carelessly but gnawed on him. He had a fever when he was in Spain, and when the fit was on him, I did mark how he did shake. 'Tis true, this god did shake. His coward lips from whence the color did fly, and that same eye which doth bend all the world, whose bend doth all the world, did lose its luster. And I did hear him groan, aye, and that tongue of his that bade the Romans mark him and write his speeches in their books. Alas, he cried, give me some drink, Titanus, as a sick girl. Ye gods, it doth amaze me that such a man of feeble temper should so get the start of the majestic world, and bear the palm alone. And so here we see what Cassius's motivations are, and that is of envy. He describes a time where he and Caesar were swimming, and Caesar felt as if he was going to sink in the water, and Cassius had to pull him out and save his life. And now, in such a position as this, he doesn't see Caesar as any different from himself. In fact, he may want to be Caesar. He doesn't feel as if Caesar deserves such a high place over the rest of them. And so from envy, Cassius is prompted to do this. Whereas it doesn't appear that Brutus has such intentions as this. I continue. Brutus responds after another general shout. Another shout. I do believe that these applauses are for some new honors that are heaped upon Caesar. And Cassius says, why, man, he doth bestride the narrow world like a colossus, and we petty men walk under his huge legs and peep about to find ourselves dishonorable graves. Men at some time are masters of their fates. The fault, dear Brutus, is not in our stars, but in ourselves. That we are underlings, Brutus and Caesar. What should be in that Caesar? Why should that name be sounded more than yours? Write them together, and yours is as fair a name. Sound them, it doth become the mouth as well. Weigh them, it is heavy. Conjure them, Brutus will start a spirit as soon as Caesar. Another shout. Now, in the names of all the gods at once, upon what meat doth this our Caesar feed, that he has grown so great? Age, thou art shamed. Rome, thou hast lost the breed of noble bloods, when there by an age since the great flood, but it was famed with more than one man, when they could say till now that talked of Rome, that her wide walls encompassed but more than one man. Now it is Rome indeed, but room enough, when there is in it but only one man. Oh, you and I have heard our fathers say that there was a Brutus once, one that I mentioned previously, that would have brooked the eternal the eternal devil to keep his state in Rome as easily as a king. Brutus responds, that you do love me, I am nothing jealous, but what you would work me to, I have some aim. How I have thought of this, and at these times I shall recount hereafter. This for the present I would not. Excuse me. But with love I must entreat you, be any further moved. I would not, so with love I might entreat you, be any further moved. What you have said I will consider, what you have to say I will with patience hear, and find a time both to meet and to hear and to answer such high things. Till then, my noble friend, chew upon this. Brutus had rather be a villager than to repute himself a son of Rome under as hard conditions as this time is like to lay on us. Cassius ends this section by saying, I am glad that my weak words have struck, but with this much show from fire from Brutus. So Brutus is deeply disturbed by the rise to power that Caesar has experienced, and is unsure of how to proceed. He doesn't want Rome to fall under the rule of one man, and Cassius, whose envy has placed him in this position as well, is attempting to appeal to Brutus. He's appealing to his pride. He's appealing to his heritage as the great grandson of the first Brutus, who disposed of the last king of Rome, and will continue to do so. He will go on to convince the other conspirators to throw in rocks in his house with messages on them to hype Brutus up, as well as to write graffiti and all sorts of things to make Brutus really feel as if the Roman people are calling him to do something about what's going on. And so the play continues, and I don't have the time to mention every single line or every single scene, but Brutus continues to struggle with this until there comes a night where, with all of the portents and the signs in the sky, there are men walking around that they're seeing who are on fire. This is all actually reported in Plutarch's Lives, though it doesn't. I would say that those probably were embellished around the legend of Caesar. That there were all these signs in the sky and whatnot that it was going that the history was going to change, and Brutus takes it upon himself and becomes one of the leaders of this conspiracy. However, what Caesar brings to the conspiracy is restraint. The conspiracy feels as if they need to not only take out Caesar himself for being too powerful, but that they also need to take out Mark Antony and other allies of Caesar. And so Brutus actually kind of restrains them from this. He says, well, Caesar is the one that we're after. In Caesar, all of the power rests, and the rest will be dispersed with the wind. And the plan is that they're going to assail Caesar while in session, and after doing so, they're going to coat their arms and their daggers with blood and march through the streets of Rome with a rallying cry of liberty, and to try to convince the people that Julius Caesar had become too powerful, and that they were granting them their right as citizens, and restoring proper order to the government. And so they do so. Caesar experiences dreams. It is warned by a soothsayer to beware the Ides of March. And his wife also experiences dreams and begs him not to go meet with the Senate that day. But he is convinced by one of the conspirators to go anyway. And he does. And in Act 3, Scene 1, a group of senators surround him and make their wishes and desires known. And while he is completely surrounded, one pulls his cloak down in front of him, and so begins the assassination of Caesar. He is murdered by friends and allies and those around him. And apparently, upon seeing Brutus approach with his dagger held, he says in the Shakespeare play, "Et tu, Brute," you too, Brutus. However, in other sources, Plutarch actually doesn't record him saying anything, which may be the most accurate. But the other historians say that he said, "You too, my son," which others have taken to mean that Brutus was his biological son, though as he was the lover of Brutus's mother. But provided that Brutus, according to what I was reading, was probably in his 40s at this period, and Caesar was about 55, it seems unlikely that Caesar fathered Brutus at 15. I guess humanly possible, but not with what was going on at the time, not likely. So Caesar lies dead on the Senate floor. He dies actually at the feet of the statue of Pompey the Great. And this is important because in the first scene, the people are celebrating the fall of Pompey the Great and celebrating the return and triumph of Caesar. And now it appears as if the coin has been flipped, and Pompey gloats over the dead body of Caesar himself. And so then what follows is probably the most famous scene in this whole play. And it really draws out what I believe is the primary theme of the entire thing, and that is the fickleness of people. Brutus and his conspirators come out. They cry liberty. They have their knives and their arms coated in Caesar's blood. And in discussing with Antony after the murder of Caesar, Antony's very upset, but in order to try to save his own life, because he believes that they're probably going to try to kill him as well, he kisses up to them a little bit and doesn't directly condemn them for what they've done, at least yet, but asks to have time to speak at Caesar's funeral. And Brutus actually says yes. He doesn't want to come off as tyrannical or a dictator in any way. And so he says, well, you may speak at Caesar's funeral, but the condition is that you cannot say anything bad about us and our conspiracy. We killed him, and there's nothing wrong with that, and you shouldn't say a thing about it. And at this time, Antony agrees. And so you come to this funeral scene. Brutus stands forward, and he gives a very reasoned discussion of why they did what they did, that Caesar had become too powerful, and that the people were going to be under the yoke of kings from here on out, and that it comes upon the good men to take control and to free the Roman people once again. He says, and I need to quote this. This is wonderful writing. It was not that I loved Caesar less, but that I loved Rome more. Had you rather Caesar living and die as slaves than if Caesar were dead and to live as free men? As Caesar loved me, I weep for him. As he was fortunate, I rejoice at it. As he was valiant, I honor him. But as he was ambitious, I slew him. There is tears for his love, joy for his fortune, honor for his valor, and death for his ambition. Who here is so base that would be a bondman? If any speak, for him I would have offended. Who is here so rude that would not be a Roman? If any are here speak, for him I have offended. For who here is so vile that will not love his country? If any are here speak, for him I have offended. I pause for reply. And the crowds, who seem to be very convicted by his words, they say, "None, Brutus, none." And he whips into these people into a frenzy. And even at the end of his speech says, "That which I slew, my best lover for the good of Rome, I have with the same dagger for myself, when it shall please my country in need of my death." He said, well, if it ever comes to me, then I would gladly die for Rome. And the citizens shout in unison, "Live, Brutus, live." And then Antony comes forward. And this will take just a minute to read, but it's the most important soliloquy in the play, brilliantly written, because you have to see where Antony is at in this story. He's in a very precarious situation. He is an ally of Julius Caesar. He loved Julius Caesar, and saw Caesar's body completely destroyed by the knife wounds that were left from these men. But he is only allowed to speak so long as he does not condemn the actions of the conspiracy. And so he has to, at least in the beginning, until he starts whipping up public support, he has to be very, very, very careful about the words he uses, as he is going to whip up the people in the opposite direction. And so he says, as many have said before, "Friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears. I come to bury Caesar, not to praise him. The evil that men do lives after them. The good is often interred with their bones, so let it be with Caesar. The noble Brutus has told you that Caesar was ambitious. If it were so, it was a grievous fault, and grievously hath Caesar answered for it. Here, under leave of Brutus and the rest, for Brutus is an honorable man, for they all are honorable men. Come I to speak in Caesar's funeral. He was my friend, faithful and just to me, but as Brutus says, he was ambitious. And Brutus is an honorable man. He has brought many captives home to Rome, whose ransoms the general coffers did fill. Did this in Caesar seem ambitious? When that the poor have cried, Caesar hath wept. Ambition should be made of sterner stuff. Yet Brutus says he was ambitious. And Brutus is an honorable man. You all did see at the Lupercal that I thrice presented him with a kingly crown, which he did thrice refuse. But Brutus, was this ambition? Yet Brutus says he was ambitious, and yet, for sure, he was an honorable man. I speak not to disprove what Brutus spake, but I'm here to speak of what I know, that you did all love him once, and not without cause. For what cause withholds you, then, to mourn for him? O judgment, thou hast fled to brutish beasts, that man have lost their reason. Bear with me, my heart is in the coffin there with Caesar, and I must pause until it comes back to me. And there, the citizenry who had were wept up by Brutus into supporting the assassination of Caesar are taken aback. And the first citizen says, "Methinks there's much reason in his sayings." And the other says, "If thou consider rightly in the matter, Caesar has been greatly wronged." they begin to start seeing things Antony's way. And Antony continues, he says, "But yesterday the word of Caesar might have stood against the world, but now he lies there, and none so poor to do him reverence. O masters, if I were disposed to stir your hearts and minds to mutiny and rage, I should do Brutus and Cassius wrong, who you all know are honorable men, but I will not do them wrong. I would rather choose to wrong the dead than wrong myself and you. But then I were willing to wrong such honorable men. But here's a parchment, the seal of Caesar, found in his chest. It is his will. It is his last will and testament. And let the commons hear, which, pardon me, I do not mean to read. And they would go to kiss the dead Caesar's wounds and dip their napkins in his sacred blood, yea, beg a hair of him for memory, and dying mention it within their wills, bequeathing it as a rich legacy unto their issue. The citizenry start shouting. They say, well, read the will. Read Caesar's will. And Antony responds, will you be patient? Will you stay a while? For I have overshot myself to tell you about it. I fear that I wrong honorable men whose daggers have stabbed Caesar. I do fear it. And they continue to encourage and prompt him to do it. And so he now has a little bit of, excuse me, I've been talking for a little while. He now has a little room to be able to kind of, to kind of speak at his own will. Antony says, if you have tears, prepare to shed them now. You all do know this mantle. I remember the first time Caesar ever put it on. It was a summer evening in his tent, the day he overcame the Nervi. Look, in this place ran Cassius's dagger through. See the rent that envious Casca made. Through this the well-beloved Brutus stabbed and plucked. As he plucked his cursed steel away, mark how the blood of Caesar flowed as rushing out of doors to be resolved. If Brutus so kindly knocked or no, for Brutus, as you know, was Caesar's angel. Judge, O you gods, how dearly Caesar loved him. This was the most unkindest cut of all, for where the noble Caesar saw him stab, ingratitude, more strong than traitor's arms, quite vanquished him, and then burst his mighty heart. And in the mantle muffling up his face, even at the base of Pompey's statue, which all the while ran blood, great Caesar fell, and what a fall was there, my countrymen! Then I and you and all of us fell down, whilst the bloody treason flourished over us. Now you weep, and I perceive that you feel the dint of pity. There are gracious drops, kind souls. Weep you when you behold our Caesar's vesture wounded. Look you here, he is himself marred, as you see, with traitors. So here he is showing off the body of Caesar and the violence, the gore of what has taken place has kind of just now entered the minds of the people who were just a minute ago cheering for the fall of Caesar. And Antony has used his rhetorical skills to stir the pity and the pity of these individuals to turn them against Brutus in the smartest way he can. Let's see. And finally, when they open the will, it is revealed that Caesar has left to every Roman citizen in Rome a little bit of money, and also has given up part of his property to make a public park for the city. And that's kind of the last straw. They see Caesar's mangled, stabbed body. They hear of how he cared for them. They read his will and see in it that he had granted them money and a public park, and that he was devoted to public goods, and that whips them up into a frenzy. Brutus, Cassius, and the rest of the conspirators are forced to escape Rome as a mob is formed. So much so that a gentleman, a poet who shares the name of one of the conspirators, is viciously and brutally murdered for their belief that he was involved in the assassination. And so the conspirators are forced to flee. They flee. They also flee east, and kind of get set up around Philippi, where they're going to have where the final battle of this play is going to take place. Meanwhile, Mark Antony, along with Caesar's nephew Octavian, become the most eminent leaders in Rome. They form their own triumvirate with another gentleman, and in order to take control, they develop hit lists of people that they want killed, and eventually, when the time is right, they set off to fight Brutus and Cassius's forces that have been raised near Philippi. Brutus receives word that his wife Portia has committed suicide after feeling the pressure in Rome. They say that she swallowed hot coals. The histories do say that as well, but as to whether that's exactly accurate or not, I myself don't know. Some say that she did that before Brutus died. Others say that she did so after. In the play, it takes place before, and you start seeing the scenes kind of show, as in Act 4 we see Brutus and Cassius start to fight. Cassius has been taking bribes and doing things that Brutus himself has moral objection to, and Brutus remains brutally honest and honorable in what he's doing. He sees what he has done as a necessity and not of anything else, and he still hopes that he can go back to Rome after a time. But as the armies of Octavian and Antony approach, they join forces and prepare for battle one final time. And it is at that time, and I should find the place, that Brutus actually sees the ghost of Caesar. This will be I may read one more section after this, but this will be one of the final sections I read today. The ghost of Caesar enters. Brutus says, "How ill the taper burns! What comes here? I think it is the weakness of mine eyes that shapes this monstrous apparition. It comes upon me. Art thou anything? Art thou some god, some angel, some devil? It maketh my blood cold and my hair to stare. Speak to me what thou art." The ghost of Caesar responds, "Thy evil spirit, Brutus." Brutus says, "What comest thou?" The ghost responds, "To tell thee that thou shalt see me at Philippi." Brutus, "Well, then I shall see thee again?" The ghost responds, "Aye, at Philippi." Brutus, "Why, I will see thee at Philippi then. Now I have taken heart, thou vanishest, ill spirit. I would once more have talked with thee." And he calls his servants around and asks them if they've seen anything, but no one else has. And so he goes to sleep. But he is able to put together that he is seeing a vision of Caesar to say that he will not survive the Battle of Philippi. And so the battle is fought. Antony and Octavian and Brutus and Cassius meet, and they are unable to come to terms of peace, and so the battle is fought. And it's here that I believe Caesar kind of shortens up the actual history. In Plutarch, it is said that Brutus and Cassius actually won the first day of battles, and that they lost the second day. But And Caesar, it is one great battle, and as the forces of Brutus and Cassius are routed, both men, Brutus and Cassius, both commit suicide as their armies flee. I will read of the death of Brutus. Let's see. Brutus says, "The ghost of Caesar hath appeared to me several times by night, at Sardis once, and this last night here in Philippi's fields, and I know that my hour has come." His servant says, "Not so, my lord. Nay, I am sure it is," says Brutus. "Thou wouldst seest the world how it goes. Our enemies have beat us to the pit. It is more worthy to leap in ourselves and tarry until they push us. Thou knowest that we two went to school together, even for that love of old. I pray thee, hold thou my sword hilt while I run into it." His friend responds, "That is not an office for a friend, my lord." And Brutus says, "Farewell to you and to you. Strato, thou hast been all this while asleep. Farewell to thee too, Strato. Countrymen, my heart doth joy that yet in all my life I found no man, but he was true to me. I shall have more glory in this losing day, more than Octavius and Mark Antony by this vile conquest shall attain unto. So fare you well at once, for Brutus's tongue has almost ended his life's history. Night hangs upon my eyes, and my bones would rest. Thou that have but labored to attain this hour." And not long afterward, the sword is held up, and Brutus says his final words. He says, "Farewell, good Strato. Caesar, now be still. I killed not thee with half so good a will." And he falls upon his sword and dies. Upon finding him, Mark Antony says he finds the body of Brutus lying there, and he says that this was the noblest Roman of them all. All the conspirators, save only he, did that they did in envy of great Caesar, and he only, in a general honest thought and common good to all, made one of them. His life was gentle, and the elements so mixed in him that nature might stand up and say it to all the world, this was a man. And Octavian says, "According to his virtue, let us use him with all respect and rites of burial. Within my tent his bones tonight shall lie, most like a soldier, ordered honorably. So call the field to rest, and let us away to part the glories of this happy day." And that is how the tragedy of Julius Caesar ends. Now, one thing I will say is that in this culture, in this society, suicide is not necessarily thought of as quite as shameful as it is in our culture and society. We generally see it and I believe it to be so, a very sad and sorry way to see someone leave their earthly life. But in Roman times, it was not so. As Brutus says, it's more honorable, it's more preferable to jump into the dark oneself than to have someone else do it for them. He knew that he was going to be captured and had already prompted his army to flee and to do the best they could, but he was going to be captured and certainly put to death himself. And so he took the action into his own hand, and that's how he died. And so ends the play. I think it's most important to point out a couple of particulars. Ambition comes up again and again. Caesar is ambitious. Antony is ambitious. Brutus and Cassius are ambitious. And its ambition is what causes the conspirators to act against Caesar. One man is anxious to gain, all of these men are anxious to gain some power, except perhaps Brutus, who, as others have said, and as is kind of illustrated in the play itself, is more interested in the betterment of Rome than he is for his own personal ambition. However, he is still inflamed by Cassius in stroking his ego, saying that, well, the citizenry are calling for Brutus to do as the original Brutus did and depose of Caesar. So he is not without ambition, I would say. But ambition is the name of the game in this play. Also, the will of the people. Democracy is a fickle thing. I think one only has to read about ancient Athens to determine that the will of the people would sway drastically and very quickly. That's how Socrates and others were put to death. Is because the public opinion of the people were swayed by orators, a prized profession of the time, and by speeches and people who had rhetorical and skills. And so here you have at the very beginning of the play two soldiers who chide the Roman people for celebrating Caesar over the death of Pompey, when in previous years they had celebrated Pompey's victories. Now they're treating Pompey like he was a war criminal, when in some way he was standing for the Senate and the Republic of Rome itself. And the people love Caesar. Caesar represents in many ways, his victory represents the ending of hostilities that have been going on for decades, or at least for that time being, or at least it could have been. But more violence as Brutus and Cassius and the rest of the conspirators kill Caesar, and Brutus is able to stir public opinion in his favor until a better speech, a more emotionally charged speech. Brutus, he does speak to their emotions, but he speaks to their logic more than that. He says, well, y'all don't want to be slaves under this dictator for life, do you? And they say, well, no. But I think Mark Antony makes an appeal to their emotions. He shows them the body. He opens the will, and it's a gift to everybody. And again, the people's opinion, public opinion, turns. Another thing that I think is interesting is it's a discussion that political ideology, political ideals often go beyond one person. I think Brutus felt as if he killed Caesar, Caesar's political ideals would die with him, and that's just not the case. I'm not a political historian. I'm not anything of the sort, and I feel as if sometimes we do ourselves a disservice if we make too many comparisons to the past, because we're not in the past. The circumstances that we are in today are not quite the same, but there are many a similarity between what happens now in 2025, particularly on the political spectrum, but in many ways, and what happened back in 44 BC. And I will not attempt to delve deep into what my personal feelings on all of that is. That's not, as I see it, my place to tell. But it's worth thought if you would consider to go into this play and consider the ways that we can see it reflected in our modern day world. And I think you can do this with most any of these wonderful classical books of literature. There is an element of applicability. Tolkien said that he rejected allegory, but that he embraced applicability, such that, in his book, The Lord of the Rings, that the ring doesn't represent the atom bomb. It doesn't represent because that's constrictive. There would be only one way to interpret such a thing, but in applicability, one is allowed to make their own judgment and reasoning, and employ it to gain more understanding of what's going on around them, to apply it to their own lives, and to apply it to the world around them, and how they understand what's going on around them. And so that's how I'll leave you today. I think I have gone on, as it says on my clock here, for over an hour, which is quite impressive for me. I hope that you all enjoyed this video. I hope that it made some sense. I feel as if I bounced around a little bit there, and I hope that that what I was saying today is well understood and is easy to understand, and that you perhaps have gained something by it. I dearly hope that you do. As always, I appreciate you being here today, and I appreciate y'all's continued support. Please leave a like or a comment if you are so inclined. Please subscribe if you are so inclined, and I will catch you all very soon for a kind of end of the month wrap up, and a discussion of what we're going to be doing next month. Perhaps it'll be a little while again before I make a video that totals over an hour in length. But I hope that each of you have a blessed day, and I hope to see you all again very soon. Thank you all very much for watching. Goodbye.